Ever heard about the Shanghai apartment block which toppled over in the middle of the night? What about the London office block that accidentally transformed into a deadly heat ray? Today, we're donning our hard hats and exploring the most expensive construction mistakes in the world. The AON Centre. In its heyday, the second tallest building on Earth, Chicago's AON Centre, initially christened the Amoco Building, remains to this day an elegant expression of mid-century modernism. Architect Edward Durrell Stone, in what can only be described as an outrageous flex, decided to clad his Grant Park masterpiece in Italian Carrara marble, a material favoured by classical artisans since antiquity. The problem with that is, Michelangelo wasn't building 83-storey skyscrapers. The Windy City's dramatic temperature fluctuations caused the marble cladding to crack and warp. And when an entire panel broke off and crashed onto the rooftop of the neighbouring Prudential Centre, well, it was high time for an $80 million granite reclad. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Jobbing construction workers, tasked with putting up what was at the time the third longest suspension bridge in the world, could already see which way the wind was blowing. That's why they nicknamed the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington state Galloping Gertie, even before it was finished. Some bright spark reckoned it would be a great idea to use cheap plate girders underneath the roadbed. After a rocky start, the bridge eventually just collapsed after 4 months and 7 days in a modest 40-mile-an-hour wind. The cost? Roughly $6 million, which in today's money after inflation works out not far off $1 billion. 20 Fenchurch Street. When construction of this innovative curvy skyscraper by the River Thames in London was completed in 2014, local wags took to calling it the pint glass. And engineers probably needed a stiff drink when it became obvious that their gigantic concave facade was focusing beams of summer sunlight like a molten death ray trained onto the busy pavement below. One hapless local's flash car was partially melted, necessitating an embarrassing payout. And the hasty installation of a gigantic sunscreen that set developers back a cool $10 million. Sydney Opera House. Widely recognised as a triumph of aesthetics and an emblem of a young, forward-thinking Australia, Sydney Opera House is in fact an object lesson in construction failure. In 1957, the Australian government held a contest to design a future national opera house. Winner Jorn Utzon submitted his now iconic sail-like design. This situation wasn't helped by the hasty construction schedule, and the fact the government swiftly decided it wanted 4 theatres rather than the initial 2 inside the same shaped structure. Without a single project manager in charge and a plan that evolved haphazardly over time, the budget spiralled. It should have taken 4 years and $4 million Australian to complete, but in the end took nearly 14 years and an eye-watering $102 million Australian. Lotus Riverside Building 7. In the early hours of June the 27th, 2009, residents of Shanghai's Minhang district awoke to an almighty crash. A 13-storey building, part of an 11-building apartment complex that was in the final stages of completion, had toppled over, killing one Zhao Dikun, a 21-year-old construction worker. Investigators figured out that a large quantity of earth, excavated to build an underground garage, was foolishly dumped onto a nearby creek. That caused the creek to divert underground, sweeping away building number 7's foundations. The estimated cost to the developer of this lackadaisical practice? $30 million, and half a dozen jail terms for those responsible. The Millennium Tower. The tallest residential tower in San Francisco stands 58 stories high, but it's shrinking. So much so that between its unveiling in 2009 and today, it has already sunk some 18 inches and started ominously leaning 14 inches to the west. The problem? It's sitting on inappropriate ground. In case you think that process, which is currently underway, comes cheap, it doesn't. The total bill, including compensation for the tower's well-heeled inhabitants, will come in at over $100 million. Whoops. And the sidewalk is already cracking.